Derek Hayes pressed his face against the reinforced glass and watched the small black and white animal tear apart a steel feeding bowl. 3 months on Sentinel, 7 research station, and this was the most entertainment he'd had all week. The creature was called a honey badger according to the label on the containment unit, brought in from Earth after customs officers found it in a smuggler's cargo hold. The other species working on the station gave the honey badger section a wide berth. Derek had seen Centaurians who fought in the coalition wars cross to the opposite corridor rather than walk past the glass. The Vrathari security chief refused to enter the bio wing when Brutus was awake. Even Dr. Yilmaz, the head researcher who'd handled specimens from 40 different death worlds, checked the containment seals 3 times before conducting observations. Derek didn't understand the fear at first. The honey badger was maybe 3 feet long, couldn't weigh more than 30 pounds. Then he read the incident reports. Brutus had chewed through his first containment unit in 6 hours. The second one lasted 2 days before he figured out the locking mechanism. The third was military grade, designed to hold creatures that could punch through starship hulls. Brutus treated it like a puzzle box and nearly succeeded before they added electronic deterrents. He'd survived 47 seconds of vacuum exposure when a cargo bay door malfunctioned. 47 seconds. The Vrathari could manage 20. Humans topped out around 15 if they were lucky. The file also mentioned that Brutus had ignored a plasma warning shot during his capture, walked directly through a stun field, and bit an enforcement officer's boot hard enough to dent the reinforced toe cap. But right now, Brutus just looked bored. Derek knew that feeling well. Maintenance technician on a research station sounded exciting until you realized the equipment never broke because it was over-engineered by paranoid coalition safety boards. His job involved watching monitors that never showed problems and running diagnostic tests that always came back green. 8-hour shifts of absolutely nothing. He'd started taking his breaks in the bio wing because at least the specimens were interesting. The mindworms from Psion 6 created light patterns when they were hungry. The acid spitters from Vrath Prime had this weird way of tilting their heads before attacking their food. The Arachnus 9 spider thing in cell 12 made geometric web patterns that looked almost mathematical, and Brutus destroyed things with focused determination. Derek watched the honey badger finish demolishing his bowl and look around the cell for something else to dismantle. The animal's eyes swept across the space and stopped on Derek. They stared at each other through the glass. Most animals on the station ignored the observers. They either couldn't see through the one-way reinforcement or didn't care about the aliens watching them. Brutus kept staring. His dark eyes were intelligent in a way that made Derek uncomfortable. This wasn't an animal looking at movement or searching for food. This was evaluation. Derek waved awkwardly. Brutus tilted his head, then walked to the glass partition and sat down directly in front of Derek. He didn't press against it or try to scratch through. He just sat there, looking at the human like he was waiting for something. "You're bored too, aren't you?" Derek said to the glass. The honey badger's ear twitched. Derek glanced around the observation deck. He was alone. His shift didn't end for another 4 hours, and he'd already run every diagnostic twice. The other maintenance staff avoided this section entirely. No one would notice if he did something stupid. He pulled up the containment unit controls on his datapad. As maintenance, he had access to the feeding systems. The researchers never bothered learning that part. They just filed requests for Derek's team to handle, which meant Derek could operate the mechanisms without anyone knowing. The feeding slot was designed for remote operation. Derek could open a small panel, just big enough to pass through food or water, without compromising the main containment. He cycled through the station supply database and found something listed as enrichment materials that had never been used. Puzzle boxes designed for intelligent specimens that he authorized to transfer and watched a small cube drop through the feeding slot into Brutus's cell. The honey badger approached it carefully, sniffed once, then started working at the mechanisms. The puzzle was rated for Tier 3 intelligence, meant to challenge species like the Centaurians who developed faster than light travel. Brutus had it open in 90 seconds. Derek laughed out loud. He sent through another one, this time Tier 4 complexity. Brutus took 3 minutes. "Okay," Derek muttered, pulling up more difficult options. Let's see what you can actually do. For the next hour, Derek fed increasingly complex puzzles through the slot. Brutus solved every single one, getting faster as he learned the common mechanisms. The honey badger's movements were precise and deliberate. He tested each part of the puzzle, remembered what worked, and applied that knowledge to the next challenge. When Derek's shift timer finally beeped, he realized he'd burned through the station's entire enrichment inventory. Brutus sat in the middle of his cell, surrounded by open puzzle boxes, looking more alert than Derek had ever seen him. The honey badger walked back to the glass and touched his paw against it. Derek pressed his hand to the same spot on his side. Same time tomorrow? Brutus made a huffing sound that might have been agreement. Derek left the bio wing feeling better than he had in months. He had 4 more months on this station before his contract rotation ended. Maybe, just maybe, he'd found a way to make it interesting that he didn't think about what the coalition regulations said about unauthorized interaction with Class 5 biohazards. He didn't consider that honey badgers were classified as extreme risk specimens for good reason. He definitely didn't wonder what would happen if he kept teaching Brutus new things. Derek was bored, Brutus was bored, and that combination was about to become every general's worst nightmare. 3 weeks of midnight meetings had turned Derek into an expert at avoiding security patrols. The cameras in Bio Wing Corridor 7 had a 15-second gap in their rotation. The night shift guard stopped for coffee at 0200 hours every single day. And Dr. Yilmaz always left the observation deck at exactly 2300 hours because his species required 9 hours of sleep to function properly. Derek slipped into the empty deck and pulled up his personal data pad. He'd stopped using station equipment after the first week, too many monitoring systems. Everything he did now ran through encrypted civilian channels that the research staff wouldn't think to check. Brutus was already waiting at the glass. Evening, Derek said, settling into his usual spot. Ready for something new? The honey badger touched his paw to the glass twice. That was the signal they developed for yes. 1 touch meant no. 3 meant he didn't understand the question. Derek had started teaching him basic communication after Brutus solved a Tier 7 puzzle meant for coalition intelligence officers. Tonight's lesson involved lock mechanisms. Derek had smuggled in 3 different types of security locks used throughout the station. He passed them through the feeding slot one at a time, along with a small display screen showing how they function when properly opened. Brutus picked up the first lock, a basic magnetic seal, and studied it for maybe 30 seconds. Then he bit down on the correct pressure point, and the mechanism popped open. The second lock used a combination system. Brutus watched the demonstration twice, then manipulated the dials with his claws and teeth until it clicked open. The third lock was electronic with a keypad. Derek hadn't expected Brutus to manage this one, but he figured it was worth trying. He showed the unlock sequence on the screen, highlighting which buttons to press. Brutus looked at the screen, looked at the lock, then very carefully pressed the correct sequence with his nose. The lock beeped and disengaged. Holy stars, Derek whispered at a voice behind him nearly made him jump through the reinforced glass. You're going to get us both killed. Carl Rodriguez stood in the doorway holding 2 coffee containers. He was the only other human maintenance tech on the station, a short guy from the Mars colonies who Derek had known for about 6 months. Carl looked at Brutus, looked at Derek, and shook his head. How long have you been doing this? Carl asked, walking over and handing Derek one of the coffees. About 3 weeks. Do you have any idea what they'll do to you if they find out? Unauthorized interaction with a Class 5 specimen is a court-martial offense. You'll spend the next 5 years in a military prison. Derek took a sip of coffee. It was terrible, like everything on the station. Look at him, Carl. Does he look like he's dangerous right now? They both watched Brutus, who had gathered all 3 locks and was practicing opening them in sequence, getting faster with each attempt. He looks like he's learning to break out, Carl said flatly. He's learning to think. There's a difference. Derek pulled up the health monitoring data on his pad. Look at this. His stress markers are down 40% since I started the enrichment program. He's eating better, sleeping on a regular schedule, showing none of the aggression that got him flagged as extreme risk. Carl studied the data for a long moment. This is still insane. Probably. They're going to find out eventually. I know. Carl sighed and sat down next to Derek. What's your actual goal here? You teaching him tricks or building something? Derek hadn't really thought about it in those terms. He'd started because he was bored and Brutus seemed bored, and he figured some mental stimulation couldn't hurt. But 3 weeks in, he discovered something he hadn't expected. Brutus wasn't just smart for an animal. He was smart in absolute terms. He understood cause and effect, could plan multiple steps ahead, and most importantly, he seemed to trust Derek. I think, Derek said carefully, that honey badgers might be way more intelligent than anyone realized. They're not aggressive because they're mindless. They're aggressive because they're frustrated. Brutus spent months in that cell with nothing to do, no challenges, no interaction. That would drive any intelligent being crazy. So you're running an unauthorized intelligence study on a death world predator. When you say it like that, it sounds bad. Carl laughed despite himself. It is bad, Derek. It's very bad. He watched Brutus solve the electronic lock again, this time in under 5 seconds. But I have to admit, that's impressive. They sat in silence for a while, drinking terrible coffee and watching Brutus practice. The honey badger had moved on from the locks and was examining the puzzle boxes from earlier sessions, trying to open them faster than his previous times. Finally, Carl spoke. If I help you, we do this smart. No more winging it. We set up proper protocols, document everything, and we figure out an exit strategy for when this inevitably goes wrong. You're going to help. Someone has to keep you from getting killed. Carl pulled out his own datapad. I've got access to the shift schedules and supply manifests. If we're going to do this, we need better equipment and more time. The observation deck has a maintenance closet that nobody ever checks. We could set up in there, run everything through isolated systems. Derek felt relief wash over him. He'd been operating alone for weeks, constantly worried about getting caught. Having backup, having someone who could help plan this properly, made everything feel less impossible. Thank you, Derek said. Don't thank me yet. We're probably both going to end up in military prison. Carl stood and walked to the glass. Brutus came over immediately, studying this new human with interest. Hey, Brutus, I'm Carl. Apparently, I'm part of your illegal education program now. Brutus touched his paw to the glass twice. He says yes. Derek translated. Great. The honey badger approves. Carl turned back to Derek. Tomorrow night, we start doing this properly. And Derek? We're calling it Project Chaos, because that's exactly what's going to happen when anyone finds out. Derek grinned. Best project name ever. The emergency klaxons screaming through Sentinel. 7 made Derek drop his wrench directly on his foot. He swore and limped to the nearest comm panel, already knowing this was bad news. Emergency alerts only went off for 3 reasons: hull breach, attack, or surprise inspection. All personnel report to stations immediately. Dr. Yilmaz's voice crackled through the speakers. Admiral Pierce will be conducting a full facility review. All experiments are now under lockdown protocol. Repeat, lockdown protocol is in effect. Derek's stomach dropped. Lockdown meant no one could access the specimens except senior research staff. No feeding adjustments, no enrichment activities, no midnight training sessions. He pulled out his communicator and sent Carl a quick message. This is bad. How long can Brutus handle no contact? Carl's response came back in seconds. 3 days max before he starts showing stress. Why is an admiral here? That was the question Derek couldn't answer. Coalition admirals didn't just drop by research stations for fun. This was serious, and the timing couldn't be worse. Derek and Carl had been running Project Chaos for 2 months now. Brutus had learned to disable basic security sensors, recognize guard patrol patterns, and operate complex mechanical systems. He could solve problems that stumped most coalition species, that if anyone looked too closely at Brutus's behavioral data, they'd notice the changes immediately. Derek made his way to the bio-wing observation deck, which was now packed with research staff. Admiral Lauren Pierce stood at the center, a human woman with gray hair and more medals on her uniform than Derek could count. She was talking to Dr. Yilmaz while a squad of armed guards stood at attention behind her. The Coalition Council has received reports. the Admiral was saying, of unusual behavioral patterns in death world specimens across multiple research facilities. We're conducting inspections to determine if these patterns indicate a systemic security risk. Dr. Yilmaz looked nervous. His species had 3-finger hands that twitched when stressed, and right now, they were practically vibrating. Admiral, I assure you our containment protocols are the strictest in the sector. Then you won't mind if we verify that. The group moved through the bio wing, stopping at each containment unit. Admiral Pierce asked pointed questions about feeding schedules, enrichment programs, and behavioral monitoring. She spent extra time at the mindworm enclosure and the Vrath acid spitter cells. Then they reached Brutus. The honey badger lay in the corner of his cell, barely moving. To anyone who didn't know him, he looked docile, maybe even sedated. His eyes were half closed, and his breathing was slow and steady. This is our Terran specimen, Dr. Yilmaz said. Honey badger, classified as extreme risk due to exceptional aggression and problem-solving abilities. As you can see, our containment methods have been completely effective. Admiral Pierce studied Brutus for a long moment. Derek stood at the back of the crowd, trying not to look suspicious. He knew Brutus wasn't docile. The honey badger was faking it, which meant he understood what was happening. That should have been impossible. Behavioral changes? The Admiral asked. None of significance. Some minor improvements in feeding patterns, but that's normal adaptation to captivity. The Admiral nodded slowly. And enrichment protocols? Standard automated systems only. We don't risk direct interaction with class 5 specimens. Derek felt his hands go cold. If the Admiral checked the feeding logs, she'd see the unauthorized puzzle box transfers. If she reviewed the security footage, she might notice the gaps in coverage. If she interviewed the maintenance staff individually, Admiral Pierce turned away from Brutus's cell. Very well. This facility appears to meet coalition standards. She paused. I'll need to review your complete records before I file my report. All specimen files, monitoring data, and security logs for the past 6 months. Dr. Yilmaz's fingers twitched faster. Of course, Admiral. We'll have everything prepared within the hour. The inspection group moved on, leaving the observation deck mostly empty. Derek stayed behind, staring at Brutus through the glass. The honey badger remained perfectly still until the last person left. Then he opened his eyes fully and looked directly at Derek. 2 touches on the glass. Yes. Brutus knew exactly what he was doing. Derek's communicator buzzed. Carl's message was brief. Data room. Now. He found Carl in the maintenance data room, surrounded by holographic displays showing security logs, feeding records, and monitoring data. Carl looked panicked. They're going to find everything, Carl said. 3 days from now, when the Admiral reviews the logs, she's going to see every unauthorized access, every puzzle box transfer, every camera gap we exploited. We're completely exposed. Derek pulled up the records himself. Carl was right. Their activities were obvious to anyone who knew what to look for, and an Admiral definitely knew what to look for. Can we erase the logs? Derek asked, not without leaving evidence of the erasure. The system keeps backups. Even if we could delete everything, the gaps would be suspicious. They sat in silence, watching the data scroll past. 2 months of work, of breakthrough discoveries about honey badger intelligence, of building trust with a creature everyone else feared. It was all about to end in courts-martial and prison time. Derek made a decision. Then we don't hide it. What? We can't erase the evidence, and running would just make it worse. So we document everything properly, prepare a full report, and present it to the Admiral before she finds it herself. Derek started pulling up their research notes. We show her that Brutus isn't dangerous when he's mentally stimulated. We prove that our methods improved his health and behavior. We make the case that what we did was right, even if it violated protocols. Carl stared at him. That's insane. She'll throw us in the brig. Probably. But at least we'll go down fighting. Derek looked back at the surveillance feed, showing Brutus's cell. And maybe, just maybe, we'll change how the Coalition treats intelligent beings. 3 days later, Admiral Pierce sat in the station's conference room, reading their report. Brutus sat in a specialized transport container beside Derek, calm and alert. The honey badger had volunteered to come, touching his paw to the glass 3 times when Derek explained what was happening. 3 touches they'd never defined, but Derek understood anyway. It meant trust. Derek had imagined his court-martial 100 different ways. Shouting matches, dramatic accusations, maybe even some sympathy for trying to improve an animal's life. What he hadn't expected was complete silence. Admiral Pierce sat across the table reading their report for the 3rd time. 2 coalition generals watched via hologram from their respective commands, their alien faces unreadable. Dr. Yilmaz stood against the wall, looking like he wished he could disappear. Carl sat next to Derek, fidgeting with his uniform sleeve. And Brutus sat in his transport container, watching everything with focused attention. Finally, the Admiral set down the datapad. Maintenance Technician Derek Hayes, you stand accused of unauthorized interaction with a Class 5 biohazard, tampering with containment protocols, and conducting unsanctioned research on a restricted specimen. How do you plead? Guilty to all charges, Derek said. But I'd do it again. One of the generals, a Centaurian named General Cross, made a clicking sound that translated as anger. You admit to creating an enhanced death world organism and claim you'd repeat this security violation. I didn't enhance anything. I just gave him puzzles. Puzzles that taught him to defeat our security systems, the other general said. This one was Vrathery, a species that looked like armored bears. You trained a predator to bypass containment measures. Admiral Pierce held up a hand. Let's discuss the evidence systematically. Dr. Yilmaz, you've reviewed the behavioral data. What are your findings? The researcher stepped forward, his 3-fingered hand steadier now that he had science to hide behind. The data shows significant improvements across all health markers. Stress hormones decreased by 41%. Aggressive incidence dropped to 0. Cognitive function tests, which we started running after discovering the unauthorized activities, show intelligence levels comparable to some coalition species. Comparable to which species? General Cross demanded. Dr. Yilmaz hesitated. Comparable to Centaurians, sir. The silence that followed was deafening. Centaurians had developed interstellar travel 3,000 years ago. They were founding members of the coalition. Comparing a Terran animal to their intelligence was practically an insult. Impossible, Cross said. This must be measurement error. We ran the test 17 times using different protocols, Dr. Yilmaz said quietly. The results were consistent. Admiral Pierce turned her attention to Brutus. Can you demonstrate? Derek looked at the honey badger. You don't have to do anything. This isn't a performance. Brutus huffed and touched his paw to the container twice. Yes, Derek opened the transport container's door remotely. Brutus stepped out onto the conference table and sat down. Every person in the room tensed except Derek, Carl, and surprisingly, Admiral Pierce. Carl pulled out a complex mechanical lock, the kind used on weapons storage. He set it in front of Brutus. We never showed him this one. Brutus examined the lock for maybe 20 seconds, testing different parts with his paws and nose. Then he systematically worked through the mechanism, figured out the sequence, and popped it open. He looked at General Cross's hologram and pushed the open lock toward the projection. Stars above, the Vrathery general muttered. He's not showing off, Derek said. He's proving a point. Brutus understands that you're judging him right now. He knows this is important. Admiral Pierce leaned forward. Technician Hayes, explain your theory about why this specimen responded so well to your training. Derek gathered his thoughts. This was the argument that mattered, the one that might save them. Honey badgers aren't just fearless. They're intelligent problem solvers who evolved on Earth facing constant threats. They need mental stimulation the same way humans need social interaction. Locking Brutus in a cell with nothing to do wasn't containment, it was torture. His aggression wasn't personality, it was desperation. And your solution was to teach him to break security systems? Cross asked. My solution was to give him challenges appropriate to his intelligence. The fact that he learned lock mechanisms just proves how smart he is. If we'd given him mathematical puzzles, he'd have solved those instead. The Vrathery general spoke up. Even if we accept your theory, You've created a significant security problem. This creature can now escape containment. He could always escape containment, Carl interjected. He chewed through military-grade materials in his first week here. Teaching him to use tools didn't make him more dangerous. It made him less desperate. Admiral Pierce sat back in her chair. I've been investigating reports from 12 different research stations. Every single one has specimens showing signs of psychological distress, depression, self-harm, repetitive behaviors indicating mental breakdown. The Coalition's current containment protocols are failing because we treat intelligent beings like objects. What are you suggesting? Cross asked carefully. I'm suggesting that Technician Hayes, despite violating every regulation we have, stumbled on as something important. We need to completely rethink how we handle Death World specimens. The room erupted in protest from the generals. They talked over each other, citing security concerns and historical precedents and military regulations. Admiral Pierce let them argue for a full minute before cutting them off. Enough. Coalition Central Command has already reviewed preliminary findings from my investigation. They've authorized a new program, pending successful demonstration. She looked at Derek. Project Companionship. Human handlers will be paired with Death World specimens using enrichment and training protocols. You'll develop the curriculum, supervise implementation, and report directly to me. Derek's brain stuttered. Wait, we're not being court-martialed? Oh, they're definitely being court-martialed. You'll be found guilty, given a formal reprimand, and sentenced to 6 months of supervised community service. Admiral Pierce smiled slightly. The community you'll be serving is every Death World specimen in Coalition custody. Consider it punishment and promotion combined. General Cross looked apoplectic. Admiral, this is madness. You're legitimizing the weaponization of Death World fauna. No, General. I'm legitimizing treating intelligent beings with dignity. She stood up. This program will proceed with full Coalition authority. Any objections can be filed with Central Command. The holograms cut off abruptly. Dr. Yilmaz looked stunned. Carl started laughing, and Brutus walked across the table to Admiral Pierce, sat down in front of her, and touched his paw to her data pad twice. The Admiral looked at Derek. What does that mean? He's saying yes, Derek said. He approves. Good, Admiral Pierce said, because you're all about to make history. The terrifying kind that gives generals nightmares. 6 weeks after Admiral Pierce announced Project Companionship, Derek stood in the newly renovated bio wing, watching chaos unfold in the best possible way. The observation deck had been converted into a training center with workstations for each handler specimen pair. What had been sterile containment cells were now enrichment habitats with puzzle stations, climbing structures, and interactive elements. The transformation terrified most of the non-human staff. Brutus sat on Derek's workstation, solving a maintenance tablet puzzle, while Derek documented the training session. Across the room, Carl worked with the Arachnus, 9 spider they'd named Felix. The creature had been motionless for 2 years before Carl started introducing web-building challenges. Now Felix created geometric patterns so complex that mathematicians from 3 different species wanted to study them. Derek, we have a problem, called out Lisa Park, one of the new human handlers who transferred and specifically for the program. She worked with a Vrath acid spitter named Pepper who could melt through steel. Pepper figured out how to open the chemical storage. Derek walked over to find Pepper sitting proudly next to an open, secure cabinet, her long neck swaying with obvious satisfaction. The lock mechanism was completely undamaged. She'd solved it rather than breaking it. That's not a problem, Derek said. That's progress. But we should probably move the dangerous chemicals somewhere she can't reach. Everything is somewhere she can reach. She's 12 feet tall. Good point. We'll need to redesign the storage system. Derek made a note on his tablet. This was the part the generals hated, constantly adapting security because the specimens kept getting smarter. Can you teach her which chemicals are off limits? Lisa looked skeptical. You think she'll just agree not to open certain containers? Brutus respects boundaries when he understands the reason for them. Try explaining that some chemicals could hurt her. Show her the warning labels. 30 minutes later, Pepper was carefully avoiding the hazardous materials cabinet while enthusiastically exploring everything else. Derek added it to his growing list of evidence that Death World creatures responded to respect and communication. Dr. Yilmaz entered the training center looking uncomfortable. He'd spent the past month arguing against project companionship in every committee meeting, citing safety concerns that no one could quite disprove because the program was too new. Now he stood watching handlers work alongside creatures he considered untouchable. Technician Hayes. Admiral Pierce has requested a progress report. Derek pulled up his data. All 12 specimens in the program are showing improved health metrics. 0 aggressive incidents toward handlers. Problem-solving scores are increasing weekly. Felix learned basic mathematical concepts. Pepper understands chemical safety. And Brutus. Derek glanced at the honey badger, who was now helping Carl organize tools by size. Brutus is helping with station maintenance. That's not possible. Watch. Carl had dropped several tools on the floor deliberately. Brutus picked them up one by one and placed them in the correct containers. Wrenches in one box, sensors in another, calibration equipment in a third. He understood categorization. Dr. Yilmaz's 3-finger hands started twitching. This program is creating intelligent weapons. It's creating friendships, Derek corrected. There's a difference. Before Yilmaz could respond, alarms blared through the station. Not the emergency klaxons, something worse. The proximity warning system that only activated when unauthorized ships approached. Admiral Pierce's voice came through the comm system, calm but serious. All personnel battle stations. We have incoming hostiles identifying as Purity Front. This is not a drill. Derek's blood went cold. The Purity Front was a radical group that believed Death World specimens should be eliminated, not studied. They'd bombed 2 research facilities in the past year. The training center erupted in controlled panic as handlers rushed to secure their specimens. Carl grabbed Felix's transport container. Lisa guided Pepper back toward her habitat. Derek reached for Brutus's container and found the honey badger staring at him with intense focus. "I need you to get in the container," Derek said. "We have to get you somewhere safe." Brutus touched his paw to the tablet once. "No, this isn't optional. There are dangerous people coming, and I need to know you're protected." 3 touches. The undefined signal that meant trust or understanding or something they hadn't quite figured out yet. Admiral Pierce entered the training center with 4 security officers. All specimens need to be in secure containment immediately. Handlers, report to defensive positions. Derek looked between the Admiral and Brutus. What if there's another option? Technician, this is not the time for improvisation. Just listen. The Purity Front is coming here to destroy the specimens and prove that Death World creatures are too dangerous to keep. What if we prove them wrong? What if the specimens help defend the station? Every person in the room stared at Derek like he'd lost his mind. Carl started to say something, stopped, then started again. "Are you seriously suggesting we ask them a fight? I'm suggesting we give them a choice." Brutus, Felix, Pepper, all of them. They understand what's happening. They know we've been treating them with respect. Let them decide if they want to help or stay safe. Admiral Pierce considered this for exactly 3 seconds. "This is the worst idea I've heard since you started teaching a honey badger to pick locks. But might work. It absolutely might work, which is why I'm authorizing it." She turned to the handlers. "Give your partners the choice. Make it clear they can refuse. And if even one specimen chooses to stay in containment, we respect that decision." Derek knelt down next to Brutus. "There are people coming who want to hurt everyone on this station, including you. I'm going to try to stop them, but I could use help. You don't have to do this. You can stay here where it's safe." Brutus walked to the equipment cabinet, pulled out a tablet showing the station's security grid, and touched specific points on the screen. He was identifying weak points in the perimeter, places where intruders would likely breach. Carl's laugh was slightly hysterical. "The honey badger is doing tactical analysis." "Of course he is," Derek said, feeling pride and terror in equal measure. He's been watching security patrols for months. Around the room, other handlers were having similar conversations with their specimens. Felix was demonstrating web patterns that could create barriers. Pepper was pointing to chemical storage that could be used defensively. A creature from Titan, 6 that could change its density, was volunteering to block corridors. Every single specimen chose to help. Admiral Pierce watched this unfold with an expression Derek couldn't quite read. Finally, she spoke. When those generals said you were weaponizing Death World fauna, they were wrong. You're creating partnerships. That's infinitely more terrifying. The Purity Front breached Sentinel-7's cargo bay airlock 17 minutes after the warning. Derek watched security feeds from the command center as 8 figures in combat armor pushed through the damaged door. They moved with military precision, weapons ready, heading straight for the bio wing. They know the station layout. Admiral Pierce said grimly. Someone gave him blueprints. Derek glanced at his tablet, showing the positions of all handlers and their partners. Brutus was with Carl in Corridor Junction 12. Felix had positioned himself in the ventilation hub. Pepper waited near the chemical storage she'd learned to open. Each specimen had chosen their own location based on understanding their abilities and the station's vulnerabilities. All teams, stand by, Admiral Pierce ordered. Let them get deeper into the facility. We need them away from the escape route. The Purity Front squad moved through the corridors, setting charges on equipment as they went. They were broadcasting on all frequencies, streaming their raid to thousands of viewers across Coalition space. Their leader, a Centaurian in black armor, spoke into the camera. Today we expose the truth about the Coalition's Death World program. These creatures are weapons being trained to threaten peaceful species. We will free the galaxy from this danger. They reached the bio-wing entrance and placed breaching charges. The explosion echoed through the station. Smoke cleared, revealing the training center beyond. Empty workstations, abandoned equipment, and no specimens in sight. Where are they? One raider demanded. The lights cut out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Felix's webs dropped from the ceiling vents, geometric patterns that stuck to armor and weapons without being sticky enough to trap anyone completely. Just enough to slow them down, make them uncomfortable, force them to waste time cleaning off the strands. Contact, someone shouted, but there was nothing to shoot at. Felix had already moved through the ventilation system, his 8 legs carrying him silently through spaces too small for armored raiders. The squad regrouped and pushed forward, trying to reach the containment units to plant their explosives. Brutus dropped from an overhead maintenance shaft directly onto the leader's helmet. The honey badger didn't bite or claw. He grabbed the camera mounted on the armor and yanked it free, then disappeared back into the shaft before anyone could react. It stole our camera. Their broadcast to watching audiences went dark. Derek allowed himself a small smile. Brutus understood that documentation mattered. Without proof of their raid, the Purity Front's message would lose impact. The raiders split into 2 groups. 3 headed toward the containment units, while 5 went after Derek's team in the command center. Admiral Pierce redirected personnel to intercept the larger group. The 3 heading for containment were about to meet Pepper. The Vrath acid spitter waited in a corridor intersection, next to chemical storage marked with warning symbols she'd learned to read. When the raiders rounded the corner, Pepper didn't attack. She knocked over a container of industrial cleaning solution, highly corrosive but non-lethal, letting it spill across the floor between them and their objective. The raiders stopped, staring at the smoking puddle that would eat through their boots. "It's using tools," one said, voice shaking. Lisa Park emerged from a side corridor, hands raised peacefully. "She's not using tools. She's protecting her home. There's a difference. You can leave now and no one gets hurt, or you can try to get past her and find out exactly how accurate her aim is." The raiders looked at each other, then at Pepper, who swayed her neck in what Derek had learned was her way of assessing trajectory. They backed away slowly. The 5-person squad approaching the command center ran into more coordinated resistance. The Titan, 6 creature that could change density, had solidified itself into a wall blocking the main corridor. Felix's webs covered the alternate routes, and Brutus had sabotaged their equipment using the same lock-picking skills Derek taught him months ago. Their weapons wouldn't fire. Their communications were jammed. Their armor's power systems were cycling randomly. Admiral Pierce's voice echoed through the corridor. Purity Front operatives, you're surrounded by Coalition security and 13 very annoyed Deathworld specimens. You have one chance to surrender peacefully. This isn't possible, the squad leader said, looking at his malfunctioning equipment. They're animals. Carl stepped out from behind the density shifter. Felix perched on his shoulder. They're partners. And you just attacked their family. The raiders surrendered. Coalition reinforcements arrived 40 minutes later to find the Purity Front squad secured in the cargo bay, all specimens safely back in the training center, and 0 casualties on either side. The commanding officer looked confused when Admiral Pierce explained what happened. Your Deathworld specimens defended the station, defended it, disabled the attackers, and demonstrated more tactical coordination than most military units, Pierce said. While exercising restraint, that honestly surprised me. Derek sat with Brutus in the observation deck, watching Coalition security process the raiders. The honey badger was tired but alert, systematically grooming himself clean of dust from the maintenance shafts. You know what you did today, right? Derek asked quietly. You proved that intelligence and compassion matter more than fear. Brutus touched his paw to Derek's hand twice. Yes. He understood, Doctor. Yilmaz entered, looking shaken. I need to apologize. I was wrong about everything. About the program, about the specimens, about what they represent. His 3-fingered hands were steady now. They chose to protect us when they could have used the chaos to escape. They didn't want to escape, Derek said. They wanted to help. That's what happens when you treat intelligent beings with respect instead of fear. Admiral Pierce joined them, holding a data pad. The Coalition Council watched the security footage. All of it. General Cross tried to argue this proves specimens can be weaponized. The Council disagreed. They're expanding Project Companionship to 20 more stations and requesting you design the training protocols. What did General Cross say to that? Carl asked. He said, and I quote, "This is the most terrifying thing the Coalition has ever approved." Admiral Pierce smiled. I told him that was exactly the point. Sometimes the scariest thing is realizing you were wrong about who the monsters are. Derek looked around the training center at handlers working with their partners, documenting behaviors, building trust. Brutus climbed onto his workstation and pulled up a file showing station efficiency reports. Since Project Companionship began, maintenance response times had improved by 34%. Brutus had reorganized their entire system. Still proud of that. Derek asked point 2 touches. Always yes. The galaxy had spent centuries fearing Deathworld creatures, building bigger cages and stronger locks. Derek had proven something simpler, but more revolutionary. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy wasn't a fearless honey badger or a bored human individually. It was what happened when they became friends. And maybe Derek thought watching Brutus plan his next project, that was exactly what the Coalition needed. A little bit of chaos, a lot of trust, and creatures who chose cooperation over isolation every single time.